Hello and welcome to Sammy Spotlight. I'm your host, Austin Patrick. Today we are joined by Amanda Onway, the president and founder of the Dungeons & Dragons Club. We have a great show for you today, so stay tuned. So tell me, Amanda, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So for those of us who don't know, what is Dungeons & Dragons?
So Dungeons & Dragons, how I would describe it, it would be a classic tabletop role-playing game, which means that everybody that is playing has their own character. It's very unique because you can be very... there's not a lot, there are rules, but there's not too many rules. So you can really go crazy and have like the most unique character that you could, think of within the within the realm of like the player's handbook and whatnot. And then the players are, their story is guided and controlled by the dungeon master, who is basically running the game, playing all the NPCs, the bad guys, all the enemies, and then your player character is the one that's going on the adventure, making friends and having all that fun stuff.
How does the club play D&D?
So how we do it is that we have two meetings every week. Because we have a lot of people in our club, and we basically have people sign up to be DMs, and they have like their own little applications, and they put out like what they're going to do for their story, and then our players who want to play, they'll pick which DMs they want to go to. So we have our meetings on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and I think we have like 5 groups that meet on Wednesday, and I think we have like 4 that meet on Thursday. So we meet in the LSC on Wednesday, so everyone's just kind of in a big room together. Some people meet like in the library and stuff. And then on Thursday, we actually meet in the Episcopal Student Center, which is really cool because we kind of have separate rooms. So it keeps the noise level down because when we're all in the big room playing together, it's kind of crazy sometimes. People scream and are super excited. So the noise level gets a little bit out of control.
So would you think role-playing is a huge part of the game?
Yes, very much so, because some DMs will do very high levels of combat, but I think most of our DMs in the club steer away from that because they're like, combat is boring, and it takes a long time because you're just waiting for your turn and you're just rolling. You're like, okay, I roll to attack, fun, cool, I did this much damage. So a lot of our DMs really emphasize role-playing and let the players be really creative and how they're playing their characters. They really emphasize like doing voices. Some people will do really funny voices for their characters, and our DMs are really great at doing like awesome voices for their NPCs and, kind of going out there.
Now, for the players who are a bit more shy, how do you encourage them to role-play more?
I think the best strategy, because I've been a DM and a player before, the best strategy is kind of go over the top with your own characters. And then they'll see like, okay, so this person is doing it really crazy. That means I don't have to do it super crazy, but it allows them to get out of their shell. So currently I play under a DM named Tristan, and he goes really crazy with his voices. And he's a guy, so he'll do female voices, so his voice goes really high like this. But it sounds kind of weird because he's a guy. And so that really helps with other players that are more shy and reserved to be like, okay, this is normal. This is okay. This is just fun, And so then they allow themselves to like explore a little bit more, get out of their shell.
So you mentioned dice earlier. How much of a factor does that come into play?
It's kind of, it's especially when you're heavy role playing, it's not too much of a factor. They will DMs will typically ask you to roll for something. You have skills, so every character will have a different kind of skill set that they're better at and which ones they're not so great at. And so whenever you're trying to implement one of those skills, like if I wanted to do like a somersault or something, you would do an acrobatics check, and then you would roll your d20. And personally, I think it's better when you fail. So I like using dice because it's funny when, even though you're pretend your character is just skilled at acrobatics, you're amazing at it. You get a +5 every time you roll. That's not going to help you if you roll a 1. You're still going to fail. So I find that use pretty fun, though the dice using with role playing is not super heavy, but when it comes to combat, it is a lot more heavy because you have to roll for attacking, you have to roll for damage, and that's where a lot of the dice use comes into play. But with skills and just straight up role playing, it's more of like whether you fail or not.
So and here there's a magic system in D&D. Can you tell me how that works?
So magic systems is very interesting because there are a lot of classes that do use magic, and it's kind of a loose magic system. So if you think of like the Lord of the Rings, it's kind of more like that kind of magic system where there are some rules, but you can be very loose with them, especially if your DM allows it. So there are 3 classes that are very like heavy magic based, which one of them is Wizard, which is my favorite. That's all intelligence. They're like big book nerds, and they learn. That's how they get their magic, right? And then with like warlocks, they have a patron, which is like a god or goddess, some kind of deity that like gives them the magic, and then so they kind of have to do their bidding. And then with sorcerer, they have like wild magic, which is really, really fun. I found is really fun because it just brings that element of surprise into your playing style. So you're like, oh, well, I'm going to predict, I really want to do this. Well, if you're a sorcerer and you have wild magic, sometimes that's not what's going to happen. But a lot of the other classes also use magic, though to a smaller degree. Like druids, they have like animal magic. They can like speak with animals and have more of that nature-based stuff. Paladins also use magic, and then clerics use magic mostly for healing. So a lot of the classes do use magic in some way, which is really fun. I love magic. Magic's great.
So how much of the game would you say is imagination versus strategy?
I think it's all imagination. Honestly, I know some people will be like, I want to max out my character so they're like super buff in this way or something like that. I don't know. Even if you do that, it's not really going to help you, especially if it's like very role play heavy. So I think most of it honestly is imagination. You can try to strategize, but it's hard, especially if you have a very chaotic group. And it usually doesn't work out. So it's usually a lot of creative thinking, a lot of imagination, trying to get these things done through creative means, not just trying to, do some strict strategizing there.
So what is one mistake you see a lot of new players make when they first join?
I think one mistake. I would say one mistake would be not asking questions. I think is because they feel like they need to know everything before they join and before they start playing, but that's not the case at all. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to know the entire player's handbook. I don't know the entire player's handbook. That's just not what I do. You don't need to read all of the books and know every single piece of information out of them. And so a lot of players feel very overwhelmed because they feel like they need to know everything. But in reality, playing is the best way to learn how everything works, and asking all of your fellow players and your DMs how this works, and not being, scared to ask them, because it's just a fun game. There's no need to be stressed about it. There's no need to feel like you don't know enough to play. It's just supposed to be fun.
You learn as you go.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Encounter by encounter basis.
Exactly.
So how many members does your organization currently have?
Right now, I think we have about 147 or so. Yeah.
And so you said these members sign up for different DMs. Do y'all have enough
Yeah.
DMs?
Yeah, actually we do. Sometimes we have a shortage of players, which is interesting. We had the opposite problem last semester. This semester we have a shortage of players, which is kind of crazy because we'll have like 2 DMs for each day. They'll be like, I only have 2 players. How am I supposed to play? How am I supposed to run a game with 2 players? Usually it's the opposite problem, but this semester was very unique because usually a lot of, DM, being a dungeon master is like a very heavy time commitment because you're creating the story, you're mapping stuff out, you're doing all this work outside of class. And so not a lot of people can do that commitment, but we have a really awesome, like, big group of DMs that are just like ready to play, ready to put in that hard work, which is really awesome.
And then, so you've DM'd before, correct?
Yes.
How linear is your story, would you say? Or is it more open world?
It's very not linear. Basically, what I take into consideration whenever I am DMing is that players are just gonna not care about your storyline that you created for them. So I just don't. Because whenever I first started DMing, I was like, okay, I need to get everything together, like all these details to make this world like super immersive, right? And then they start playing, and then it goes completely off the rails. So at that point, I just decided, I'm like, I'm just going to let what happens, happens. And I'm going to wing it. And that's the best part about being a DM, honestly, is just coming up with stuff on the fly. Because your brain is more powerful than you think. I always get stressed about it. I'm like, oh no, what if they do something and I'm like, I don't know how to react? You will know how to react.
Well, and then, do you have any advice in case like a player derails your campaign? How to bounce back from that?
My advice would be subtly move it back into place by putting you might have like different plot points that are like ahead of the schedule. You might want to like push them forward somehow, introduce an NPC that'll be like, hey, don't you want to go to like that castle over there? That's pretty cool, and you're like, yes, that's where all my plot is, go over there. The players might be like, no, we don't want to go there. Well, that's fine. Just move it to some other place. Like, just move the characters that are doing the plot to somewhere else. It's pretty easy to get them back on track without, like, railroading them. And you have to give them the illusion of choice, honestly. It is the illusion of choice because you only have so much planned out, So you have to use and recycle all these ideas no matter where they're going. So I definitely think that's a great way to get them back on track without being like, you have to go there. Stop messing around, guys. We can't go over to this lake. You need to go over to this mountain,
So I did mention players derailing a campaign, but do you have any bad DM stories?
Yes, I do. So I used to play last year. I played under a DM that was like the epitome of railroading. He wouldn't even let you create your own character. He had his own pre-planned characters made, and if you wanted to put in your own character that you made like from your own brain, he would charge you money because he would be like, this is so much work because I need to work them into the plot. So it's like he was a super perfectionist, like nothing could be done a different way from the plot. And how he described it to me is he wanted his D&D sessions to play out like a movie in his head, which does not happen in D&D. It's usually very chaotic. So yeah, that was really problematic because I don't like it, being put in a box, especially when you have a character that's like, well, you can even choose your character at that point. And my favorite part about playing D&D is making the character and making them my own. So that was interesting.
So can you go a little into the process of making a character for D&D?
Yeah, of course. So when you're making a character with D&D, definitely start with like the player's handbook because that has everything in there that you're going to need to start making a character. So what I usually like doing is I always choose a race and a class first, because sometimes you can optimize it where the race kind of matches up more with the class, and but if you don't want to and you're just like, I want to do something really chaotic that doesn't really seem to match up, like a dwarf, let me see, like a gnome, like paladin or something, or barbarian. Like they're really small, but they're like a really heavy hitter, you know. But that's basically going to give you your basis for starting. And then what I like to do is you have your D6s where you roll for your main stats for like strength, charisma, all of that. And then you match them up to, or don't match them up to what your class wants to do.
Well, thank you so much for letting us get to know the Dungeons and Dragons Club. And thank you all for watching Sammy Spotlight. I'm your host, Austin Patrick. Have a nice weekend.